Welcome back to the podcast. Today I want to talk about retail and hospitality. So that is stores, e-commerce sites, hotels, restaurants, where uptime equals revenue. In this sector, cyber incidents turn into customer experiences and failures fast. Checkout stops, bookings fail, loyalty accounts get abused, and the brand trust takes a hit. According to the March Cyber Risk Forecast, ransomware remains the top risk for retail because it directly disrupts operations. But the second riskiest attack type, and the one that often causes long-term financial damage, is payment card skimming and e-commerce data compromise. This includes web-based skimmers, checkout manipulations, and abuse of third-party payment or analytical scripts. Today, I want to quantify that risk in a way that reflects real retail operations and real financial exposures. So let's start by defining this attack category clearly. Payment skimming in retail is not about stealing a database all at once. It is about quietly inserting malicious code into checkout flows so that the card data is captured and transactions while business continues as normal. And that's what makes this risk so dangerous. Sales keep flowing, customers keep buying, and the compromise can persist for weeks or months before anyone notices. The longer it runs, the larger the exposure, which means this risk is not defined by a single event. It is defined by duration and volume. So now I want to talk about the likelihood, how likely this kind of attack is. In the March forecast, payment card skimming and e-commerce compromise in retail sits in the high likelihood band. So that's 60 to 80% probability within the next forecast horizon. So the forecast trend shows this risk as up in the next 30 days, remaining high through the next 60, and still high 90 days out. This tells us that this is not a short-term spike. It is persistent because it's an economically attractive attack model. The drivers are structural. There's a heavy reliance on third-party scripts, rapid site changes, marketing pressure, and complex payment integrations. Now, let's ground this in publicly observable data. So retail payment skimming campaigns are regularly disclosed by card brands, by payment processors, and security researchers. Public reporting shows these attacks often remain undetected for extended periods of time, sometimes across multiple sales cycles. Most do not involve an advanced zero-day exploit. Instead, they rely on compromised credentials, unmonitored script changes, and the trusted vendor access. So, if your e-commerce controls are close to the industry average, these incidents are not edge cases. They represent your real exposure, not hypothetical, real. So now let's talk about the impact. So the financial impact of retail payment compromise is driven by three factors: how long the skimmer runs, how many transactions were affected, and how quickly the incident is contained. Now, public breach cost data shows that even modest pre-transactional losses add up quickly when the volume is high. So costs include fraud reimbursements, chargebacks, payment processor penalties, forensics investigations, customer notifications, and that long-term brand damage. So unlike ransomware, these costs accumulate quietly. Now, organizational size matters here. So for a small retailer, a skimmer incident may result in hundreds of thousands of dollars in direct and indirect costs. For a mid-size retailer or a hospitality brand, costs can reach into the millions. And for a larger, high-volume e-commerce platform, prolonged skimming incidents can create multi-million-dollar exposures and long-term trust erosion. The probability of attack may be similar across retail, but the financial outcome or the impact is not. Now, let's talk about quantifying the exposure. If we combine the high likelihood band, which we said was 60 to 80% likelihood, from the forecast, and we combine that with publicly observed retail breach costs, we get an exposure envelope, not a single number, but a range. So for small organizations, exposure may be limited, but still material. For a mid-size and large retailers, exposure scales rapidly with transaction volume and delayed detection. And this exposure exists even if your security posture matches the industry average. That is an uncomfortable reality. So you can't just think, I have good security, this won't happen to me. So many retailers assume that if their systems are running and sales look normal, security must be holding. But that's one of the points that this forecast challenges, this assumption. So payment skimming is designed to stay invisible. Remember, it doesn't disrupt the checkout. It doesn't trigger availability alarms. It only becomes visible once the financial damage is already done, okay? Which means the absence of obvious symptoms doesn't mean the absence of risk. Now, controls such as scripts and script integrity monitoring, checkout change detection, segmentation, and vendor oversight all reduce this risk. But the forecast makes a key point. These controls reduce the duration and severity, not the existence of the attempts themselves. Attackers will keep trying. So your financial outcome depends on how quickly you can detect and contain unauthorized changes. That's one core quantification insight for retail. Now, I want to ask you a question. Well, okay, 3 questions. First, how many third-party scripts touch your checkout flow today? How quickly could you detect an unauthorized change? Or have you even tested this? And if something was compromised, how fast could you isolate affected storefronts without shutting everything down? And you have a plan for that, right? These answers determine your exposure more than any single security tool. Those 3 questions. So now let's look at the forecast horizon, the next 30, 60, 90 days. So the 30 days shows elevated activity as attackers continue to scan for weak integrations. That's your third parties. Over the next 60 days, complexity increases as campaigns and promotions and updates introduce more change. And across the next 90 days, the forecast does not show relief. It shows persistence. So this isn't a spike. This isn't an anomaly. This is a new baseline of risk. The attempts that are coming in. Payment skimming also creates a second order effect, and that's the chargeback rise. Payment processors increase scrutiny. The customer trust erodes. And the incident narratives are often driven externally and not by the retailer. So reputation diminishes, and this is why the risk sits just behind ransomware in the forecast. So this is the second riskiest behind ransomware. So here's the bottom line takeaway. In retail, the second riskiest cyber threat is not the one that shuts you down. It's the one that quietly drains value while everything appears to be normal. Something that the March cyber risk forecast shows is that payment card skimming and e-commerce compromise are at a high likelihood and persistent risk. So, if your security maturity matches the industry average, in other words, you're like just about everybody else in the industry, these numbers absolutely represent your real exposure. And the question is not whether attackers will try. They will not stop. The question you should ask and take to leadership is how long they can stay hidden and how much damage accumulates before you see them. I hope you like and appreciate this kind of content. If you do, please subscribe or follow, and I will see you in the next video.